Hello and welcome to the SciFirst MovieTalk episode. So in this episode I'm discussing the 2021 slasher horror sequel, Fear Street Part 2, 1978, as once again directed by Janiak and as based on the book series of the same name by R.L. Stine. The movie actually forms part of a trilogy, with each movie, parts 1, 2 and 3, respectively being shot back to back and then released literally weeks apart. This being the second, of course, delving further into the realm of terror which was introduced to us in the first movie, focusing even more on the dark legend and legacy of an ancient curse bestowed upon a small community in a town called Shadyside, which has seen more than its fair share of seemingly unrelated massacres over the years. Each movie is also set in a differing time period. The first took us back to 1994, where we met a group of teens from Shadyside who inadvertently get mixed up with an old curse dating back to the 1600s. Following which each of them are hunted by a murderously unstoppable force. The second in the series, this one picks up right where we left off within the first, with Dina Johnson as played by Kiana Madeira and her brother Josh as played by Benjamin Flores Jr. looking to seek help from one of the only known living survivors, C. Behrman, as played by Gillian Jacobs, to find a way to cure Dina's possessed girlfriend Sam, as played by Olivia Scott Welch. As we delve further into the lore surrounding the curse bestowed upon Shadyside, we look for potential answers in the past, and with that we are transported to the summer of 1978, where Behrman's story is told. Set within the area's local summer camp, Camp Nightwing, we see more of the rivalry between Shadyside and its neighbouring town of Sunnyvale, as camp counsellors and campers alike from both towns live a bittersweet existence side by side, usually with explosive and confrontational outcomes. In the heart of all the madness, Ziggy Behrman, as played by Sadie Sink, and her sister Cindy, as played by Emily Rudd, have their own difficulties and differences, with each trying to come to terms with being Shadysiders in their own way, and what that means for their future. In doing so, they are inadvertently embroiled in the ancient curse, of course, the witch's curse, which sees a serial killer unleashed amongst unsuspecting, unhappy campers. Putting their differences aside, both Ziggy and Cindy must work out how to put an end to the curse before it puts an end to them. So, I must say that after watching the first film in the series, I am having an absolutely fantastic time with the ideas, the premise, the horror, and the way that so far everything has kind of fit together. These two films have actually been quite an enjoyable experience. There was a danger, I think, that perhaps this kind of setup, kind of spanning three films in this way, could kind of start to feel a little bit episodic, like a mini TV serial. But even though there is an element of that, I think there is, they do still feel like films in their own right. And a lot of attention and emphasis has been put into the detail and direction to make this so. And this is certainly more than evident watching this film. Set in the 1970s, it has a different aesthetic to the bright neon husk hues of the first movie, being a lot more plain in its choice of palette, and offers a different element of the story we know so far, with its own interesting take on the lore. Intrinsically linked to the events of 1994 in some excellent, absolutely excellent ways, but yet providing its own backdrop, characters, and development in more than an involved way. One thing is striking from the start, and that is the homage this movie pays to one franchise in particular. Being set at a summer camp with an axe-wielding maniac on the loose, one can't help but draw similarities, of course, to this, and of course, the Friday the 13th franchise. And this movie knows it, 100%. It embraces it and brilliantly sets up much of the gore and kills in some very familiar ways. Even the score, this time penned by Marco Beltrami and Brandon Roberts, is very reminiscent of the iconic themes from the series, and indeed, it sets up a very similar air of tension and suspense. It has a very similar vibe and energy to the earlier movies of the Friday the 13th franchise, but with a more of a contemporary feel. There are a few juicy throwback moments, if perhaps a little cheesy, but seemingly excellent nonetheless. So, I mean, rather cleverly, but most intriguingly, the slasher element of this movie, as fun as it is only part of the overall story. The legend of the Shadyside witch, known as Sarah Sarah Fear, takes centre stage, and we do go all Blair Witch for a moment, which is also tantalisingly intense. So one thing I did actually notice, I noticed it while I was sort of putting these reviews together, is that when 1994 is set before 1996's Scream, 1978. Now, I often thought that the Friday the 13th franchise actually was set in the 1970s. It's the 1980s. That's when they started. So there is no kind of Friday the 13th in the 1970s. It kind of springs to mind that perhaps these films are kind of setting the scene for why those other films existed. It's very interesting that these films are set just a couple of years before each of those other two kind of prominent franchises started. Yeah, very odd, but perhaps I'm just thinking too much. Perhaps I'm reading too much into it. Just something I noticed. But anyway, both Sink and Rudd are absolutely excellent at selling both their characters and the fear which unfolds as this gets ever more brutal and extreme. In fact, I would say that this is, this entry takes a more effort in building up its characters and their relationships than the first, in much more kind of a sympathetic and relatable way from the very start. Setting up again a teen-orientated story with a more adult twist. It's very similar in that respect, but a much more raw and kind of hitting harder core this time around. I must admit, it did remind me a little bit of the 2000 movie Ginger Snaps in that respect, and how very much of the character development and direction was kind of delivered in a very similar way. Additionally, in a very similar vein to the first part, this entry makes perfect use of the music from the time, with some absolutely excellent classic 70s hits, or at least around that era, A total kind of 70s jukebox, which definitely fed into the vibe and feel kind of that the movie was going for, and it totally worked. It totally blew me away. But also giving it a real kind of funky and kind of fresh, kind of feel-good teen energy for a horror. Even if its overall subject matter was otherwise dark and disturbing, something about the mix was just so satisfying, The overall story is more than engaging, getting much more involved as it progresses. Certainly bringing us developed characters with substance and meaning in a very kind of intelligent and investigative offering, with some rather kind of sweet moments kind of threaded in between the horror. Overall, this was another fantastically gory and very unnerving kind of slasher movie with an intriguingly spooky twist, pulling together some of the best horror elements from the movies and literature of the kind of late 70s kind of era into its kind of own intriguing and ever-burdening case, hitting a superb balance between horror, suspense, nostalgia, and kind of setting up its own mark on the overall story unfolding within this universe. The kills are fast, the swift, the brutal. This one isn't kind of messing around at all and shows a distinct passion for the era, The genre and indeed the franchise it pulls together with its excellent pacing, characters, cinematography, the direction, the score and soundtrack are all kind of perfectly set to capture the mood and essence of the era in one of the most enjoyable ways. The Shadyside case is kind of starting to piece together quite nicely at this time, and I'm certainly loving the way that it has all kind of been put together. Absolutely tremendous McCabe fun. I am, yes, definitely looking forward to part 3. So, that brings me to the end of this episode. Many thanks for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please leave a like. Please do hit that subscribe button for more movie reviews, trailer reactions, and other movie-related content. Absolutely loved having you here at SciFirst MovieTalk, and definitely love to have you back. Most of all, just thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.